This is Alpha Centauri. You may be put off by its age and rudimentary graphics. You might have an intrinsic gut feeling that no part of you at all wants to play this game. But I'm here to tell you to ignore that feeling, because this right here is one of the best games ever made. And I'm not just going to convince you of this, I'm here to try my darndest to get you to hop online, find a copy and experience it for yourself. So, we're going to talk about this game, what's so special about it, and why you owe it to yourself to give it a try. But before I give you my very convincing argument, let's set the scene a little. Talk about the day and age when Alpha Centauri was really making an impact. So it was released in 1999, and those of you around back then may remember this as a big old year for gaming. Consoles were pretty hot stuff. This was the age of the PS1, N64 and Dreamcast, and the year that each platform released its own landmark title. Ocarina of Time, Final Fantasy VIII, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and Soul Calibur all came out in that year. It was a good time to be a gamer. Over in PC land, there was a lot going on too. EverQuest was turning audiences onto the world of MMORPGs. Unreal Tournament was stepping up the FPS game. And Age of Empires 2 was taking the masses by storm. The strategy genre was very much alive and well, although it was starting to take a turn towards real-time, as opposed to the turn-based variants which had reigned supreme previously, because they were easier to make. The big name in turn-based strategy was, as it still is today, Civilization. But the future of that franchise was in choppy waters. There had been grumbling among employees at the game's developer and publisher Microprose, and a few key names decided to jump ship. This fella here, Brian Reynolds, along with Jeff Briggs and Sid Meier, the guy whose name was literally on the box. So it's safe to say this wasn't just your standard worker turnover. Civ 2 was receiving critical praise far and wide, shifting 1.2 million units in its first couple of years. It was a huge deal for the publisher, but the original creators just didn't seem that into it. So they broke ties and founded Firaxis. But this new team couldn't make another game in the franchise, because the IP still belonged to Microprose. So they moved on to other pastures, kicking off with a little ditty called Gettysburg. A very solid game, but without the scale and grandeur as the 4X games that put these guys on the map. However, during this game's development, they've been working on something else. Something a little bit meatier. Something that built on their strategy roots, but with a sci-fi twist. Alpha Centauri. I know what you're probably thinking. It's just Civilization, but in space. That's what a lot of people assumed, but that's not what Alpha Centauri was. They didn't find a loophole in their IP conundrum by just setting the game among the stars. No, they wanted to do things a bit differently. They wanted the story to be an intrinsic part of the game, less of the historical murkiness of Civ, and more of an orchestrated, finely tuned narrative. Canonically, Alpha Centauri loosely takes place after a game of Civilization, when a player wins a science victory by launching an expedition to settle in a new star system. From your point of view, you just assume everyone lived happily ever after because, well, you won the game. You've secured humanity's future. But Alpha Centauri concerns itself with what happened next. That group of colonists quickly splintered and formed different factions. Some of these groups look to preserve the balance of nature. Some aim to set up a new capitalist utopia, whilst others want to slash and burn and rule by overwhelming force. Civilization is a game about humanity's successes. Alpha Centauri is one about its failures. So this was the first major difference. These factions mattered. They played a part in the game and the story. Civilization may nudge players into a certain playstyle with their nation choice, but you've got the free reign to do what you want, and the game is always happy to surprise you. Attila the Hun might turn out to be a peaceful bastion of arts and culture, or Gandhi might end up raining nuclear Armageddon down on your empire. Life on Alpha Centauri isn't quite like this. The Spartan Federation will always lean towards the rule of force. Gaia's stepdaughters will always try to preserve the balance, and Morgan Industries will always be looking for a big payday. This might sound restrictive, but somehow it's not. The game isn't about rewriting history, because that history hasn't been written in the first place. It's about witnessing a sci-fi epic with these key characters, how they interact with each other, try and forge a new future, and deal with the most important lead, the game's world. Alpha Centauri doesn't just take place on a map. This isn't just land. This is the planet. Cryon, if you want to give it a name. This world is very much alive. It lives and it breathes. Well, I think anyway. A vast fungus network lies just beneath the surface, acting as a neural network. Another pretty groundbreaking feature was terraforming. You could raise the ground, divert rivers, create canal networks, even bore into the planet's mantle. But this doesn't go unnoticed though, and Cryon won't take kindly to being drilled into. I'm not making a point about the retribution of nature or the importance of responsible landscaping. No, I mean, Cryon is literally alive, and it will try to kill you. It's an alien hive mind, and as the human factions spread across its surface, it gains sentience. It fights back. It attacks population centers with parasitic brainworms. It will kill every single human on the surface unless, well, I won't spoil the big plan in case you do actually decide to play it, but it's a doozy. So again, this isn't just civilization in space. This is, in its own right, a sci-fi narrative told in a very unique way. And it's not a cheap story to tie everything together. It is genuinely incredible. The overarching narrative and the way it's told, the factions each have different approaches, add extra pieces to the puzzle, and make it so each retelling feels just that little bit different. And none of this came about by freak occurrence. They weren't just trying to make a 4X competitor. The team behind it really poured themselves into this game to make something that just hadn't been done before. Given that it was a new company, they had the ability to think outside the box and try things differently. They wanted to make a game of unprecedented depth and scope, but not in the ways others had been used to. They incorporated potential players before the game went live, inviting Civilization fans to test the game in public betas. They took the feedback in stride and used it to improve all aspects of the game. They also wanted the AI to be a cut above other games of this ilk. In this day and age, AI in 4X games is still something of a mess. I can play Civ 6 and the computer is usually pretty brain dead. To account for that, the game usually doesn't make the AI better, it just gives them a bigger advantage. I don't know if it's just me or if there's any truth to this, but the AI in Alpha Centauri just feels better. It feels smarter. Yeah, granted, there are way fewer systems in play. On paper, it almost certainly is many times more inferior, but purely anecdotally, I find it rarer to see the AI do something and think, yeah, that was pretty dumb of you. But there's a reason for that. They made a whole thing of training the AI in Alpha Centauri's development. The creators were firm believers in a developer playtesting thoroughly, so if they noticed the AI being a bit funky, they change it, until they stopped noticing it. And the AI felt like a computer player no longer. It's little touches and attentions to details like this that make the game such a joy to play, even 2 decades on. The team behind it didn't just want to throw it to the wind and hope players liked it. They really wanted to build this up into something bigger than just a game. They got Michael Ealy involved to write 35 weekly snippets called Journey to Centauri. This set up the backstory, made the game something more than just playing God with no repercussions, as most 4X games tend to do. When it came to its release, the critics were bowled over. Scores of 5-star reviews, 9s or 10s out of 10, and many more 90% plus features praising this cutting-edge strategy title. For some, it was Game of the Year, which is impressive given 1999's catalogue. This was a technical marvel, and the Sci-Fi take really won over the publications. The story was compared to a mashup of Frank Herbert, Arthur C. Clarke, and Isaac Asimov. It was interesting, it was engaging, and it was unique. The game's sentient alien world was also something reviewers of the time shone a light on, as well as the competing factions upon its surface. But as rave reviews kept pouring in, there was one glaring elephant in the room. The game kept getting compared to Civilization 2. But then again, why wouldn't it? The comparisons made Alpha Centauri look better. This was the superior game. It was more ambitious. It was incredible. Yet sales didn't come close to the big franchise. It still shifted copies, but it wasn't near to what Civ could pull off. For the budding developer though, this was enough for them to keep the train rolling. They released an expansion which added more of everything. New factions, new tech, new facilities, new alien lifeforms, and secret projects, and victory conditions. But just as that momentum was picking up, the future of this exciting new franchise was already in jeopardy. Players who jumped ship from Team Civ would quickly realise that their new game of choice was heading for troubled waters. Reynolds, one of the company founders and the strongest driving force behind the game, actually left for Axis, and any possibility for their landmark title to turn into a franchise left with him. He'd go on to make Rise of Nations, and Alpha Centauri would remain as a one-off. never to receive the follow-up it deserved. But that's not to say it's lost forever. You can sit down, open up GOG or something, find the game and play it. But you're still not convinced, right? Why not play something newer? Something more advanced? Something better? I'm sure you've got your examples to do all these and more. Go ahead, leave the names in the comments, make your case, because I need to make mine. So first off, I'm not nuts. Well, a bit. The game has its issues. I mean, even in 1999, it wasn't exactly graphically impressive. But then again, you aren't looking for an old title to play because of how it looks. Take all the other heavy hitters from 99, and they aren't going to be looking much better today. If you're going to grab something from a few decades ago, it's got to offer something unique. I said that Alpha Centauri never received a sequel, and that is kind of true. It did receive a quote-unquote spiritual successor in 2014, Civilization Beyond Earth. And you're probably looking at this and thinking it's a much more appealing game. It's all I promised Alpha Centauri would be, but it just looks and feels modern. Yeah, this game exists, and yeah, it's a modern equivalent that has a lot of nice quality of life tied into it. But Alpha Centauri is still better. I made the point, this is not Civilization in space. But this right here, that's exactly what it is. It's just Civ in space. It doesn't have that science fiction wonder. It doesn't have the impending doom of the planet. The factions just don't have that same impact. You don't feel like you're in the middle of a story. You feel like you're just playing a game of Civ and there's a story happening around you. But you can, and you probably will, just ignore it. So, Firaxis' successor doesn't cut it. But on the other hand, there's this. Endless Legend. It's just a mechanically more interesting game than Beyond Earth. And it does have the asymmetric feel with the factions. Not to mention a bonkers story of anomalous beings eating space dust and intergalactic elves. And this may absolutely be your cup of tea, but it doesn't scratch that itch either for me. It doesn't have that element of being plausible. It's a great setting in its own right, but it's more of a fantasy setting in space, where Alpha Centauri has this whole doomed human future that's been the spark of so many sci-fi greats. So yeah, there are modern equivalents that are kind of in the same vein, but I'm still going to champion Alpha Centauri. But let's just say you listen to me. You take the plunge and install it. What can you expect? I'll be honest. First off, remember that this is a game from the 90s. Some quality of life stuff you've come to expect doesn't exist here. Things are a bit fiddly, graphical representations are a bit basic. But look past that. You'll get used to it, and then you won't be bothered by it as you see this game for what it really is. Rather than playing the same game you've been hammering away at for hundreds of hours, or trying to whittle away at the final few achievements on this or that, why not take a gamble? Give this game a chance and see if it gets its claws into you. If you get hooked, well, then I can guarantee you'll lose dozens more hours to this magnificent title. So what do you think? Did I sway you? Even just a teeny little bit? Did you, have a cheeky little look for where to get the game online? You can be honest, let me know in the comments down below. Unless you think Beyond Earth is the better game, in which case let's all just keep our comments to ourselves, yeah?